Today we begin lesson 6-3, representing percents greater than 100 or less than 1. We will start with two examples under the key concepts at the top of page 350 in the white Topic 6 packet. The first example shows a percent greater than 100. In this example, 275% can be written as the fraction 275 over 100. Remember that the percent symbol means out of 100. So whatever the number is in the front of the percent sign will be over the 100. 275 over 100 can be and should be simplified to 11 over 4. And we do this by factoring out the GCF. The greatest common factor of both 275 and 100 is 25. Both can be divided by that number to simplify to the 11 fourths. So 275%, which we started with, written as a simplified fraction, is 11 over 4. And both 11 over 4 and 275 over 100 can simplify to the decimal 2 7/75, or 2.75. In the second example, we are given a percent that is less than 1. So we have 1/5 of a percent, and that's going to be less than 1%. The decimal equivalent is 2/10 of a percent. So if you convert 1/5 to a decimal, you get 2/10. Written as a fraction over 100, because remember, this percent symbol means out of 100, and the number in the front is the number above the 100. The problem with this answer is that you have a decimal within a fraction. Now, as we move on in the year and we move into the 7th grade content, we will learn about complex fractions, which this is. For our purposes here in covering the 6th grade content, we don't want a complex fraction. We want to go ahead and get rid of this decimal. It's just too complicated. So what we want to do here is to remove this decimal. We want to move it over one place to the right. Well, to go from 0.2 to a 2, we're multiplying by 10. So that's great, but you have to do the same thing to both sides of your fraction in order for your numbers to be equivalent. So 0.2 times 10 is 2, and 100 times 10 is 1,000. This can be simplified. We can divide, because they're both even numbers, we could divide them both by 2. Remember, you have to do the same thing to both sides. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1,000 divided by 2 is 500. So this would be your fraction equivalent of 1/5 of a percent. Now, let's talk about this decimal here. Okay, so this would be our answer in decimal form. Okay, I looked at this 2/10 of a percent, and I know that it's out of 100. Out of 100. Okay, so we're dividing by 100. So why don't we just go from, I showed you this strategy the last 2 days. If you're moving from a to a percent, you would move your decimal 2 places to the right. And if you're given a percent and you want to do a decimal, you would move your decimal 2 places to the left. You're starting as a percent, we have a decimal, and we don't move it to the left. 1, 2. We're going to plug in a 0 placeholder. Our final answer in decimal form would be 2 thousandths. Circle the answer. Okay, so we have 1/5% written in a fraction is 1 out of 100, and as a decimal, it would be 2 thousandths. Okay, so that's just a brief introduction. We'll go ahead and go through this in a little bit more depth. The next section is the do you understand? The essential question for today's lesson: how can you write a percent greater than 100 or less than 1 as a fraction and as a decimal? This is a little bit lengthy of an answer, so you're not going to want to write too large, otherwise you'll run out of room, just as a warning. I'm going to go ahead and give you a minute or two to write this down, and then I'll go through and explain. Okay, when working with a fraction, or to get to a fraction, you're going to write the percent as a fraction compared to 100. So you would take the number in front of the percent sign, and that would be your numerator. And since we're working with percents, the denominator would be the 100. Then you will use multiplication or division to write an equivalent fraction. Okay, so you could use division to simplify, multiplication to eliminate decimals, as we had done in this example here. We multiplied in, and here we divided out, just to simplify our answers. When you want to move from a percent to a decimal, you're going to write the percent as a fraction compared to 100. Then you would divide the numerator by the denominator. Okay, so like this one here, we had to take 1 and divide it by 5 to get the 0.2 or the 0.2%. And then we could go ahead and write the fraction over 100 and simplify. Okay, number 2, Explain why 3/4 is less than 100%. Take just a few moments and write that down, and then we will explain. So if 100% equals 1 is a whole thing, then any amount less than 1, which 3/4 is less than 1, is less than 100%. So if you have 3/4, which is less than 1, and we want to convert that to a percent, percents are out of 100, multiply the denominator by 25, and we would multiply the numerator by the same 25 and get 75, which is 65%. That is less than 100%. Number 3. Why is the numerator greater than the denominator in a fraction that is equivalent to a percent greater than 100? Go ahead, take a moment and write that down, and I will go over it in a moment. If you have a large percent, like let's say 325%, that would be written as 325 out of 100. So the numerator, which is the top number, is greater than the denominator in a fraction because a fraction that is equivalent to a percent greater than 100 is greater than 1. If you would go ahead and divide this, you would simplify, and when you divide by 100, you just move the decimal 2 to the left. This would be 3 and 25/100ths. Okay, so if you have a percent that's greater than 100, its equivalent decimal would be greater than 1, and 3.25, 3 and 2/4 is greater than 1. Okay, number 4. Explain the difference between 1/2 and 1/2%. Please write that information down. So the number 1/2 is equal to 0.50 or 50 hundredths, or you could also say 5/10. Or 50 over 100 is also a half. But when you throw in the percent sign after the number 1/2, the number changes pretty dramatically. So 1/2 of a percent is 1/2 over 100, written as 0.5 over 100. Now again, this is what we call a complex fraction, and for our purposes in 6th grade, we don't want a decimal within a fraction. So I went ahead and multiplied the top and the bottom by 10 because that moves this decimal 1 to the right. So now I have 5 over 1,000. And then we could also simplify that as 1 over 200. Okay, so the fractions would look very, very different. So they are not equivalent. 1/2 and 1/2% are different. Okay, next we're going to do questions 5 through 7. You're going to write the each percent as a fraction and as a decimal. So they give us the percent and we're going to convert it to the fraction and decimal equivalent. I'm going to walk you through question number 5 and 6, and then I will give you a few moments to try number 7 on your own. Okay, number 5, we have 150%. So we've got two different numbers here. We have the 150, and we have the percent, which is 100. And the 100 would go underneath. Let me see if I can get that to be a little darker here. It might be, let me see, a little too, I'm getting a glare. Okay. I think that looks better. So we have 150 over 100, and we want to, whenever you can simplify, you need to simplify. So we could start simple. Both numbers end in 0. You could just kind of cross off, because if I cross off the 0 at the top, I can cross off the 0 at the bottom, because what you do to one side, you do to the other, and it stays equivalent. All I'm doing there is actually just dividing top and bottom by 10. I can further divide by 5, and I get 3 halves, which is 1 1/2. So I have the fraction equivalent and I have the decimal equivalent. Number 6, again, I have my first number here in the front, and the second number reflects this percent sign. So what we're going to do is convert the 3, because we're not going to have a fraction over 100. We're going to turn this into a decimal, and 3 divided by 10 is just 3 with a decimal after, and we're moving it 1 place to the left. So we get 0.3 is the 3/10, and the percent means out of 100. Okay, so this would be our decimal equivalent, but we don't want a decimal within a fraction, so we can remove that decimal, and we get 3 over 1,000. Okay, so that would be our fraction equivalent. And then in decimal form, if you take a 3, the decimal would be here to be 3. And to divide by 1,000, we're going to move the decimal 1, 2, 3 places to the left, fill in our circles. we get 0.003, which is 3 thousandths. So again, we have our percent, our fraction, and our decimal. Go ahead and take a few moments and try to turn this percentage into a fraction and also a decimal. When writing a fraction, we need two numbers. We need the numerator and we need the denominator. The numerator will be the number that's in the front of the percent sign. So we get the 2400ths would be the numerator. And then the denominator is the 100 from this out of 100%. So this is a complex fraction, which we don't want. So to get rid of the decimal, we need to move it 2 places to the right, which is multiplying by 100. Need to do the same thing to the bottom. And we get 20, oops, I almost wrote 25. We get 24 out of 10,000. In simplest form, we could go ahead and divide, well, let's divide by 4 to start to simplify, and we get 6 out of 2,500. And they're both even, so I need to divide out a 2 yet. I could have divided top and bottom here by 8. So 24 divided by 8 and 10,000 divided by 8, but that might not have been so obvious right away. So I divided by 4 to begin with, and then divided by another 2, and that gives me 3 over 1250. Okay, so 24 hundredths of a percent as a fraction is 3 over 1,250. And then the decimal equivalent, if we go back to the beginning here, we set it up as a fraction, okay? And to divide by 100, we just move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if we have this 2400 already, and then divide it by 100, so our decimal is now here, and we need to fill in a 0. We get 0.0024, which is 24 10,000ths. So here's our percent. Here's our fraction. And here's our decimal. That was a hard one. Okay, question number 8. Kelly saved 4/5 of her allowance. What is this percent expressed as a fraction and as a decimal? So the first thing we're going to do is convert this 4/5 to a decimal. So 4/5 as a decimal, if you do 4 divided by 5 without a calculator, the division problem would be set up like that. That converts to 8/10. So this 8/10 is this first number here. And then to set it up as a fraction, we're going to put it over the 100. So we have 8/10 over 100. We don't want a decimal within a fraction. So we'll multiply by 10, get 8 over 1,000. And now we would simplify this. We would divide by 4. We get 2 over 250. And you can still go because they're both even. So you could still divide by 2. And you get 1 over 125. So 4/5 of a percent is equal to 1 over 125. To get the decimal equivalent, you're starting with this 0.8 and you're dividing by 100. So you would move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if we have 0.8 and we're dividing by 100, we move it 2 places to the left, and that would be 0.008, which is 8. Oops, sorry about that. Keep cutting off. Is 8 thousandths. Number 9. Mrs. Sanchez sold her house for 250% of the amount she paid for it. What is this percent expressed as a fraction and as a decimal? So here we have a percent that's larger than 100. So the numerator is going to be larger than the denominator in this example. We're going to go ahead and simplify. We could take off one of the end zeros from the top and the bottom, and then we could divide by 5. 25 divided by 5 is 5. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Here would be the fraction that we're looking for, and the decimal equivalent would be 2.5. So 5 divided by 2 is 2.5. Okay, this ends today's lesson. Tomorrow, when we meet again, we will continue to do some practice. I'll lead you through maybe 2 or 3 more examples, and then you'll be able to practice in the Math Excel and in the white packet on the next 2 pages. And you'll have more details about that tomorrow. I hope you have a great day, and good luck in your other classes.